Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 228 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, I am speaking with RJ Dreiling. RJ is an attorney out in Los Angeles, California, former prosecutor for 15 years, handling cases from traffic all the way up to murder, has had some high profile cases as a criminal defense lawyer, but recently, just a couple of years ago, made the transition from prosecutor to the criminal defense side of practice. RJ and I have a great conversation about kind of really being passionate about the work that you do in criminal defense and the kind of mental health side of criminal defense. But RJ also, you can tell, is very intentionally seeking how to make his practice better. He's got a lot of great suggestions to share in terms of how he has tried to improve the client experience at his firm. But you can also sense this kind of like passion and hunger to take his business to the next level. He reached out to me about coming on to the podcast. And for somebody that's only a year and a half into their own practice, a real good signal of how to become an influencer in the criminal defense space is how much are you kind of striving to kind of push your firm, your brand to new heights and kind of break the limits of where you currently are business-wise. RJ is clearly doing that. He's a very humble guy, but incredibly intelligent, both in his courtroom knowledge as well as in his brand and business building knowledge. You can tell he's thought a lot about where he wants to take his firm moving forward. So I really enjoyed this conversation with RJ, a shared legal marketing mind, branding mind, but also RJ is very intentional about getting the best result for his client in the courtroom, and that is kind of where he finds his meaning and deeper purpose in practicing the law. So I really enjoyed this conversation with RJ and am sure that you will do the same. Well, RJ, I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. You've got a ton of experience in criminal law, a lot of it from the dark side. Just kidding. From the prosecution angle. I think that's such a huge advantage for anybody that's in the defense realm to have that prior prosecution experience. I do not have that. And I think it's a real leg up for anybody that is coming from that side of things. But very excited to have you on the podcast. You are operating in a very competitive environment, Los Angeles. So definitely would love to hear kind of your background in the law, and then also kind of all of the difficulties in kind of launching your own practice, reasons why, and just talk shop. Very excited to have you on.
Sounds good. I mean, thanks for having me on. Like I was telling you before we started recording, it's just very obvious to me. You know, I've been kind of looking for people in the criminal defense realm that have their own podcasts that seem to be doing pretty well in terms of their practice. So I'm very appreciative that you had me on. Just to kind of give you an overview of my kind of career trajectory. And I told you the story. I was in my trial advocacy class, and someone put out a request for an intern for the DA's office out here in LA County. And I kind of done the firm thing. I had a good time. It was an employment firm. But I remember I walked into the DA's office just to do the interview. And it was really it was very kind of compact. There was like 2 to 3 DAs per office. It was just kind of a certain kind of chaotic, kind of informal energy to it. And I instantly just kind of fell in love. And I was fortunate enough that after I clerked there, I got a job there. You know, LA County is a very big county. It covers a good chunk of Southern California. It's about 10 million people. So it's actually bigger than most states. And so our office covered everywhere from Long Beach to Pomona to downtown LA to Malibu to Pasadena. So as you were working there, you work kind of all over the county. So you get to know a lot of other public defenders, other DAs, other defense attorneys, and it kind of slowly progressed from doing like the very non-serious stuff. You know, I think I had a case early in my career where a married couple got into an argument about the color the husband painted the walls, and I think the wife slapped in the face. And I had the wife. I was prosecuting the wife. So you start off in this really kind of low level stuff. But then you make your way up, and you start doing lower level misdemeanors and higher level felonies. I specialized predominantly in domestic violence towards the end. I was training other prosecutors on that, and they did public corruption, which involved campaign violations, misappropriation of public funds by local city council members, mayors, and things like that, which I also found very enjoyable. And I joke, we get a lot of complaints, and everywhere we looked, we kind of could usually find something, but I enjoyed that. But I got 15 years in and just decided, I had really loved my time there, but decided maybe it was time to give it a go and do something different. And I talked with a lot of criminal defense attorneys that I really respected, who were very encouraging. So about a year and a half ago, I pulled the trigger and started my own firm. And thus far, it's been a lot of up and downs. It's definitely a very, it's been the business aspect of something is something I've been working on quite a bit. There was an initial kind of difficulty switching to going from what you would call the dark side to the light side. There was definitely an adjustment phase having been in law enforcement for that long, but it took about a couple months, and now I think we're on a good pace right now. We're starting to think about hiring some extra people, and things overall are kind of progressing. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the work. Yeah, I'm have a newfound appreciation for a lot of the criminal defense attorneys that I ran into as a prosecutor, and how much work it is and how much nuance is involved. It's as I'm discovering, you're thinking about, how do I talk to the prosecutor? What should I say? What should I not say? Is today the day they ask for the offer? Should I put this case over? Should I talk to this judge today about my client, or should I wait another day? What's this judge going to respond to? What's this judge not going to respond to? All those kind of complicated, kind of overlapping factors are something that I didn't quite appreciate really when I was a prosecutor, but I'm getting accustomed to learning and using to my client's advantage now that I'm a criminal defense attorney. So
yeah, that's awesome. I kind of to that point, I think, stepping into the other side shoes is so helpful. Probably, so I started practicing in probably maybe around the same time, 2009. And basically not long before that, they had, night court here in Asheville, where members of the local defense bar were kind of like acting as the prosecutors in traffic court. They would get contracted to come in and basically be the prosecution. And I feel like it would be great if you could like have a criminal defense lawyer step into the shoes of a kind of misdemeanor DA's position for a day, and just be like, this is total madness. Like, I've got to talk to 100 people. I've got to reach out to all of these officers. I've got to coordinate with these victims, and then go back into the office and prep for the day. Like, just to experience that, I think would be eye-opening in terms of just, here is the kind of laundry list of difficulties that the DA is facing as I'm trying to get their attention for 10 seconds about this particular case. Like, there's a lot on the proverbial plate, and vice versa. Like, obviously having a sense of, from the DA side, what's going on the defense end. I just think it would be, powerful to have that like overlap. So again, I think that even from a, beyond just the legal value of standing on the side of the prosecution for that many years, there's just so much understanding of the kind of mental gymnastics that a prosecutor is having to go through in order to kind of get to your case, and like all of the drain and emotional drama that's going on in the courtroom that you kind of otherwise get to be oblivious to as a criminal defense lawyer. I think being aware of that in terms of both like, again, kind of like judging, is this a good time to ask this prosecutor something or not? Yeah. Like that's a huge advantage.
That's funny. It's one thing that I've learned definitely the past year and a half, and I can see it when you're talking about it, which is, as you're describing what the prosecutor is doing, I can tell you're tuned into the struggles and the difficulties of being a prosecutor. And I think that's one thing that I think really differentiates like good attorneys from really great attorneys, because there's a guy named Chris, I think his name's Chris Voss, who talks about this kind of
Oh yeah,
strategic
Chris Voss. We just read
Oh, there
his
you
book. We
go.
have a little book club with uh kind of this group called the Freedom Fighters, which is kind of group of criminal defense lawyers that are kind of talking about the business of law. And we just read his Never Split the Difference
There you
book, which was
go.
killer. Yeah.
And if it, if that tactic can work with people taking people hostages,
Yeah.
it's fair to say that when you're dealing with a difficult judge or a difficult client or a difficult prosecutor, that just taking a moment to breathe, and rather than asserting what you think is your position and what needs to be heard, and saying, hey, like when you walk up to a prosecutor, there's a bunch of other defense attorneys there. Hey, I know you're busy. Can I take 10 seconds of your time? Right. That's what they're all, judges and prosecutors are always very mindful of their time. And if you can just acknowledge the fact that you're mindful of the fact that they're busy, you can get their attention for that 10 seconds to say, hey, I know my guy did X, Y, and Z, but what about X, A, B, C? And can we reach a disposition like this? I think that's when you pay a criminal defense attorney, I think is kind of that's what you're paying for, is someone who knows how to talk, who knows their audience and how to talk to them, to make sure that they're telling your story in a way that's not just, for example, in court the other day, I saw a guy walk up to a prosecutor. He had a CD in his hand, and she's sitting at her desk in the courtroom, and he kind of throws at her and says, "Take a look at that and call me back when you're ready to dismiss my case." And it's like, well, that's probably going to have the opposite effect. She's going
Yeah.
to dig in. She's going to think, what the heck is up with this guy? And she's going to do everything she can to discredit whatever it is on that CD. You've just had the opposite. And I think you have to, it's definitely a learning process, which is what you touched on, which is being aware of who you're talking to, what they're worried about, and knowing how to show them that your client's interests overlap with their interests. Does that make sense? I think that's what
100%.
you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah, the other thing that you kind of said just a few minutes ago that also is about like that same kind of perspective was you're talking about, the um, early case, but husband and wife, fighting
yeah.
about the color of the room, and made me think of that kind of quote, the hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you, or something along those lines. And it's the same thing when it comes to cases. Like the hardest case you've ever had to deal with is the hardest case you've ever had to deal with. And so, early on in my practice, I had this client that was charged with I think it was with communicating threats. I got into an argument with her neighbor. She, back and forth yelling, and, I think threw something on her lawn. And then basically, neighbor had come over and like put a dead bird on her front,
Oh,
on her front porch, and her kid had come out with ice cream. And this was this big deal. And so I walked in, this was like a couple of months into practice. I'm like, this is going to be a real fight. And so the public defender that was representing the other person charged with communicating threats walks up to me and he's like, hey, do you have the other person in this dead bird case? And just like started laughing. And I was like, oh, okay. It is as absurd as I kind of like thought it was, but like, it's
yeah.
okay to like express that like
Yeah.
out loud. But I think the where I'm going with this is that I feel like prosecutors have that have been in here what we would call superior court. I don't know what California would like the differentiation, but felony level cases, when they come down into district court, there's like a different appreciation for the district court madness and doing things with district court. So again, that same level of perspective. And for somebody that is kind of like had all of these high profile cases that you've been involved in, and high level felony cases, I think that's also helpful when you're talking to clients that are charged with traffic cases and misdemeanors, in terms of being able to put things into perspective for the potential client. Because I think a lot of people are calling like, what is the worst case scenario that's going to happen to me? And you've kind of got like a different level of perspective, having been involved in those kind of high profile or just kind of high level felony cases. So I think that perspective is huge additionally.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one thing I know, this, one thing I have found is that A lot of the folks that really shouldn't be too worried about their case are the ones that get really worried. And it's the people that run in the same social circles as us that have a good job, a family, and it's their first time being arrested. And
Yep.
they're just, they're just freaked out, And so I think part of what I'm learning is that for my job, it's not just, the legal process and getting the best result that I can. It's that, listening to them and assuring them and helping them, realize and that their life is not over. They're not going to prison. They're not going to jail. And then having that conversation again 2 days later, you're not going to prison. You're not going to jail. And kind of helping them through the process. It'd be nice just to kind of have a first conversation with them on the phone and then go handle the case and call them when it's done. But I think for most of our clients, there's an understandable, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of trepidation about what's going to happen. But I think part of what we get paid for is to be there and to listen and to kind of take away a lot of the uncertainty. Like, here's how the process is going to work. This is what the DA is going to do. This is what the judge is going to do. Here's where I'm thinking we're going to land, and kind of, alleviating a lot of that anxiety surrounding for you and I, the court process is like, at this point, it's, second nature for us. But obviously for a lot of clients, it's just an overwhelming prospect.
Yes.
So that's like, I'm assuming you deal with that a lot too, is kind of taking away the uncertainty and helping them through the process.
Yeah. And I mean, and I totally agree too about, people that have never been in trouble before, regardless of like how minor the, level of the charge might be, that it's still like this overwhelming question mark. We have, a client that I was talking with, one of our, um, case managers today, about who was charged with basically like failing to yield, got into a minor accident, property damage only. Literally, it's a case that would get dismissed upon, proving that the insurance has taken care of the damages. But for this client, like when she called in, and I think she's somewhere in her 60s, if I'm remembering correctly, I'd never had a charge, and she's like, am I going to go to jail for this? Like, is this like, am I going to, and again, it's like, no, you're not going to go to jail. But I do think it's one of those things where you can, fail to appreciate, because you just are hearing these same conversations so much, what somebody's mental state looks like if you're not really paying close attention and being present in the call. That's something that has been like a major focal point recently, here with our team, in the last couple of huddles that we have done, weekly team huddle meetings that we've had, has been about, kind of like, how do you get out of the routineness of doing the same consult over and over and over again, and really be present and focused, with the person that you're on the phone with the person that you're in a in-person consultation with, because it's just so easy to kind of get into that like habitual model of, it's just another this X type of charge, when really it's like, again, like you just said, this person has never dealt with this situation before.
Now, is that something that came naturally for you when you opened up your own practice, the ability to be present and like empathetic with the potential clients?
I think that is somewhat natural. I think that I really enjoy talking to people, and what I get the most out of when it comes to practicing is kind of the in-office or over the phone conversations. I like fighting in the courtroom. I enjoy, trials, but I think it's definitely more that in-person connection. But having said that, I also think that when you have done it, year after year after year, it's still really easy to kind of like zone out, or just be like, this is the same exact circumstance, and really just, forget routinely, if not almost every time, this is the first time this person is having this conversation, despite it being maybe the 1500th time that you've had this same conversation. So it's a hard thing to remind yourself of.
So what do you do in order to kind of keep yourself present? Do you have any tricks or anything like that? Or
I was just talking with another attorney that I interviewed on the podcast, and one thing that he was saying that he did, was basically just eliminating kind of like the screen distraction for phone calls.
Yeah.
I think that it's so hard in this like world where you can do like so much CLE virtually and all these things. Like you catch yourself very routinely, like checking the email, looking
Yeah.
on social media, whatever it might be. So he just basically said, like, I've kind of shut down my computer and just like take notes on paper, even if it's a phone phone consultation, like, and I'm able to like plug all that. Is like it's a accountability check to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to kind of remain focused and present on the conversation. I think for me, it's really a struggle, like a constant thing to just be really trying to ask a lot of questions. I think most consultations that go well and require presence are conversations. And so I think trying to stay away from too long of a pitch, not really
Yeah.
like a sales pitch, but too long of like here's the consequences that you're going to be facing, cutting that even into like manageable chunks. And, do you have any questions about that? Can kind of keep it from becoming too much of a, verbal throw up, it's just
Yeah, exactly.
here's all of the information. So I think keeping it in a conversational framework is really helpful. But I think asking a lot of questions is it's it's the best way to me to show knowledge about the subject, by asking the right questions and a lot of questions, but it also kind of keeps it in this kind of conversational back and forth framework, which kind of requires presence to then ask follow-up conversations. So try not to let anybody, I try not to be too long-winded or let the client get too long-winded. So it becomes this kind of like one-sided zone out.
Yeah, that's a good point. And early on when I started, I think one of the traps I fell into during consultations would be um, wanting to tell the client how awesome I am,
Yeah.
and you
Yes.
know, you know, I am how I figured it out. But it's, to your point, one thing I've learned is much better to ask questions. And one thing I've found to be particularly effective is, obviously I don't guarantee results, but let me tell you about a person who was in a similar situation to you, right? And it was out of this courthouse, which is where your case is, and involves this charge, which is the charge you're facing. And here's how I was able to get them a good result. And they walked away from this whole ordeal. It was an initial nightmare, and they were anxious and upset. But now it's just kind of in their rearview mirror, and they're doing okay. And I found that people are much more hesitant to accept how great I am when I'm trying to sell myself. When I'm telling them about someone who I helped out through the process, you can kind of see it's alleviating their anxiety, and that they're listening and accepting what you're saying. So it's, to your point, it's much better to have a conversation as opposed to just sitting down and talking about, well, you're looking at 20 years in prison, but if you hire me, I'll get you probation.
Yes.
I
Yep.
think that seems to be, I don't know what your experience has been, but that does seem to be sometimes that some attorneys tend to kind of fall into that trap a little bit.
Yeah. I had a friend that, kind of went from the prosecution into the private sector, criminal defense side of things. And one thing, pretty early on, I don't know where he got this from, but we were literally like driving to a conference together, and he was doing a consultation on the phone, and he kind of like wrapped up the consultation by asking, what would a great outcome look like to you in this particular situation? And I have no idea what the client said, but like he basically gave them some feedback on, okay, well, I think we'll be able to do that, or what, that here we are going to be like the roadblocks to kind of achieving that, but here's the goal then of moving towards this. And that was really like an eye-opening moment for me, because I had always basically just assumed, I know what people want, like what, that they just, are expecting or wanting a dismissal or kind of the minimum possible sense, without ever putting that out there to them. And I do think that, having done that now a number of times, you can kind of get a gauge on where the client's expectations are, and then also like what the primary focus would be. Because it might be, I need this, this charge to go away in order to keep my job, or I just need to stay out of jail to keep my
Right.
job, or whatever the kind of like focal point would be. I want to make sure that my uh, family doesn't find out about this. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy answers to that question, but I think that just having a better sense of like what does a good outcome look like is helpful, because I think what was really frustrating for me in the first few years of practice would be I would get a great outcome in court and then have client leave like a bad online review, or like kind of call the office and just kind of express like disgust about the case. Flip side, I would have clients that would get what I would consider like a pretty awful result in the courtroom, or mediocre, like this is just kind of run of the mill, that were ecstatic. And kind of what I found pretty early on in practice was like, the experience that the client has through the process of like you having that person's back and following up with them, great communication, is way more important than the ultimate outcome that happens in the courtroom. And it's not to downplay the ultimate outcome in the courtroom, but it's like that really does matter more. And then more recently, with that conversation with Nick, former DA, he basically just kind of opened the door to being like, well, it's also helpful to know kind of what your client, like what a good outcome looks like for your client. I mean, that's
Right. Yeah,
that's
sure.
another good thing to have as a guardrail. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's been, I think that the client experience to me is like the number one priority.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I always try to work on, which is being available to them, because, you know, even though for you and I, like we talked about earlier, something can be kind of a run-of-the-mill, low-level misdemeanor. If someone's sitting around on a Thursday or whatever, or Friday, and they start panicking about something and they send you an email, taking 2 minutes or 3 minutes to respond to that email and just letting them know, answering their question, and just alleviating the uncertainty can make a big difference. And I think that goes
Yes.
again to your point, which is if they just feel like someone cares about them and someone has their back, it can just, I think, alleviates their anxiety, first of all, but also gives them more trust in the process at the end. So when you go to them and you say, hey, here's the deal that I got, and I think we should take it, I think that they're going to trust your advice much more if they feel like you've had their back throughout the process, as opposed to not talking to them for 6 or 7 months, coming back with an offer, and they're going to be like, well, what the heck? Now all of a sudden he wants to settle the case. He hasn't done anything, whatever the case may be. It helps kind of move things along in a productive way. I think that's advantageous both to the client and to the practice, generally speaking, to keep an open line of communication.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's actually too part of the reason why going to war for your client, I would almost say like having like a trial first approach is so helpful for our firm in terms of like the kind of culture and identity and client process. Because I think that when you go to war for your client in the courtroom, there is a trust relationship that's getting built there. I can remember a case that I had a number of years back, possession with intent to sell and deliver marijuana, and kind of went to war over a kind of minor discovery issue on the case, and ultimately the judge kind of called the state out. I mean, this was not like going to result in a dismissal or anything, but there was this, pretty intense back and forth, and ultimately the judge requiring that certain evidence be released. And, the case down the road ultimately resulted in a plea. And I don't think that I would have got the buy-in from my client if we kind of didn't show like, hey, we're going to push this to the extent that it makes sense to push it. Like if there's an issue to kind of go to battle on, that's going to be in your best interest, we're going to do that. So I think that also kind of like plays into it. And when you, in a traffic case, in a misdemeanor case, when you're doing that, by calling up, the insurance company on behalf of your client so they don't have to do that, or making a connection with an alcohol assessor. Again, it's that same kind of thing of like, oh, this person's got my best interest at our heart. They're trying to help me through the process. So I think, again, that's just such a powerful and like low hanging fruit way to earn trust, is just by doing the little things that are more natural. Again, we have been through this a number of times, and so it's just easier to kind of make those connections, than it is for the person that's never been through that before.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I'm kind of wondering, I know you've been doing this for some time now. Do you still have the kind of same, I'm sure you do, but if you could explain maybe the same passion that you have for what you do now as when you first started, and maybe some tricks or some things that you've done to make sure that you still feel enthusiastic about what you do and not to get too bogged down in the business aspect of and the ups and downs with the income and all that. Just something that, because obviously in talking to you, that you still feel very passionate about what you do. So I'm kind of curious how you're able to keep that up as hard as you worked, as long as you've worked, to keep the passion going for what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that the easiest way to avoid burnout is to just love what you do, and that's easier said than done. Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of stress that comes along with handling criminal defense cases, practicing law in general. But I think for me, like, the passion has somewhat shifted to a little bit more of like a organizational passion at this point, as opposed to kind of like the one-on-one client passion. And so, I probably have a handful of current cases. I do, the federal DUIs here in the Asheville office, and then a couple of DMV hearings, but have mostly stepped outside of the courtroom and am focusing more on kind of like creating a culture that responds to, the needs of our client, making sure that we're kind of systematically thinking through that. And there is constant change and improvement. Like, the beauty of that focus is that there's no end
Yeah,
in the game on that side of things. I mean,
sure.
it's always going to be improving. But I also think that there's plenty of lawyers that I know, criminal defense lawyers, that are solo, or it's them and a legal assistant that have been doing it forever and just loving being a criminal defense lawyer, loving being in the courtroom. So I think it's also kind of finding, I I love trying cases. I love being in front of a jury. I love helping clients. I love sitting down with them in the office, but I have kind of found over time that the passion to kind of like focus on the business end is a deeper, more fundamental passion. It's kind of like, can I help more people have a bigger impact in the criminal defense world generally, by kind of focusing more on our team and then letting them take care of the clients versus having that direct impact. And there is a difference. Like, to me, like, there's so many good, rewarding moments. You cannot replace the hug that you have with a client after a win, or a DMV
Right.
license reinstatement. Like, that's like the height of being a lawyer, is that kind of
Right.
like special client moment. But again, it's just kind of like the passion somewhat, has shifted. And again, it's not to say I don't like doing those other things, but I think it's finding what you really enjoy doing, whether it's a specific type of case because of like the clients, maybe the kind of general clientele that come in with those type of legal issues. For me, like, again, within the like realm of criminal possibilities, my favorite thing to do is DMV license reinstatement restoration hearings,
Mhm.
because it's kind of like you get to go in to this, redemptive character moment with the DMV hearing officer. Like, a lot of these people are clients that I've represented in the past on their DWI when they're at the lowest point, and now they've gone
Uh-huh.
out, like, built a business. They're like doing good in the community. They're sober, like, whatever this, individual circumstances are, we get to go in there talk about that, be able to present that to the hearing officer and then humbly ask for that license to be reinstated. And when it is, it's like, man, there's nothing more powerful than that feeling. But again, I think if you can find those things that give you energy and focus on those, and as much as possible eliminate the stuff that you don't enjoy doing, whether that's admin stuff at the office, working on the trust account, whether it is specific types of charges where it's just like I just have a moral qualm with this particular type of like I can't get behind this scenario. I think it's important to just recognize that and be like, let's focus on the work that brings joy, because somebody else loves doing the things that you hate doing. That's the
True.
key. Yeah.
I like what you said about the DMV reinstatement hearings out there, because it's, when you're a prosecutor, the things you get value out of are the most serious cases
Yes.
involving murder, high level felonies, and things like that. And I think the reason why a lot of prosecutors don't necessarily or would have an aversion to criminal defense work is because they're viewing the criminal justice system through the lens of their cases they get the most value out of.
Yes.
So when you talk about criminal defense, they're like, how can you defend a murderer or a rapist or whatever the case may be?
Yes.
But one thing I found in my practice is that, and this goes to what you were saying, some of the most valuable work I've found so far has been on some of the really low level stuff. Like, for example, I had a guy who was, he had a DUI from like a year ago. He's placed on probation for 3 years. He was a DACA recipient. And in order for him to continue to renew his DACA status, we needed to terminate probation after a year. Otherwise, it wasn't to get renewed. Now, as a prosecutor, terminating probation from 3 years to 2 years on a first-time DUI is just not that something that's going to show up on your radar or really be that big deal.
Yeah.
But as I'm talking to the guy, he's like, this is everything to him. And our ability to get this probation terminated early is everything to him. So we filed our motions. We go to court and he's there with his kids and his wife. And you have this experience. They're just kind of look at you like, oh, man, please pull this thing off. And I'm nervous. Like, I'm really nervous. Like, I used to get nervous before a murder trial. Yeah. I'm sweating over terminating probation early. And sure enough, the judge granted the motion, terminated early. And you walk out of that courtroom and you're just a hero, and that's the coolest thing about this job that I didn't have in the other job, which is the direct one-on-one interactions with people like that, where like a small thing makes a huge difference. And that's, like, I'm sure you've had those. I had a misdemeanor child abuse case. It's my third case ever, where the guy went to, he was with his wife up late with a kid. He reported it. DCFS got involved. He reported to his therapist. The therapist reported to DCFS. The prosecutor should never have filed the case, in my opinion, anyway. But to them, it's just a misdemeanor. Like, what's the big deal? But to him, it's like, am I going to lose custody of my kid? Am I going to prison? My life over? And thankfully, we got him to dismiss the case a few months in. But those little kind of otherwise small kind of victories are the coolest thing. And I think if someone out there is thinking about moving from prosecution to defense side, it's funny because you mentioned going to the dark side. When I left the DA's office, my flyer had my face on Darth Vader. The joke was I was going to the dark side, leaving the prosecution.
Yeah.
But it is one of the most rewarding things I've been a part of in my entire legal career, is helping people out in these kind of small situations to get their life back on track. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I'm guessing that's something a lot of your employees are finding, is the most rewarding part of the practice, is helping out people in situations like that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think, and I think that, that's why even kind of like maintaining that presence within consultations, but obviously, within, actual representation itself, I do think that a lot of that is also kind of critical to like long-term, mental thriving. I mean, that lack of burnout, because I think when it becomes too much of the same old stuff and you just feel like part of the process, that's when all of the like pressures and stresses and anxieties become too much, because there's like no there's no dopamine hit that's happening
Right.
in those situations. Like, I think we're built to help other people. And so it's kind of like if you lose that like focus of like, this really is making a difference in other people's lives, or again, it's like you're maybe even just helping, I wouldn't say the wrong kind of people, just helping on cases that you're not as passionate about. It's just not going to feel the same as if you're really kind of going to war for somebody that, it's like, I really care about this cause. And obviously not every cause is going to feel like this tremendous victory, but I do think you kind of have to regularly reflect on that. In terms of just kind of as you've stepped out into you know private practice. I know a number of lawyers for the government, prosecutors that have gone into criminal defense. And there must be kind of like somewhat of a scary moment. You're like leaving this like kind of stable salary and benefits, and just understanding here's like what the lay of the land looks like. You become kind of successful within the office. What are some of like the doubts or frustrations or hurdles that you experienced, and kind of how did you kind of work through those?
I mean, that's a great question. So I was there for a decent chunk of time. I don't think there's a lot of prosecutors that go, I mean, there's some retire and do criminal defense, but most are out like 5 or 6 years. I was there 15 years. So, it just, like I said, for me, it was just a function of getting to a point where I felt like I had a good career in the office, and it was either going into management, which a lot of people do. And is a really great option. But for me, it was like, I want to try something new, and I want to build something, and I want to challenge. And don't get me wrong, the DA's office was challenging, but I wanted a different kind of challenge. And so, there was definitely times over the past year and a half where the income goes up and the income goes down, and you kind of look back on that steady paycheck and you're like, God, that was nice. The benefits, right? The 401k, the pension and all that. But, I will say this, that what has kind of kept me going is I've had a lot of encouragement from other people who left the office that have done this, and, having their support and being able to call people when you've got those questions about, hey, are you guys slow too? That's hearing, yeah, we're slow too, goes a long way. It's just like, we're both feeling it right now. That goes a long way. And, the business aspect of it, was not natural to me, as far as itemizing where my referrals are coming from and knowing which referral sources to continue to push to network with. That was something that's new to me. I can't remember who was it. I think it was Elon Musk was talking about, when you run your own business, the thing you're going to be spending the most time doing is the thing you like doing the least, at least at first, which is the thing you're going to struggle with is the thing you're going to have to work on. And so for me, it's identifying referral sources, doing the financials and some of the administrative stuff to begin with. And what has kept me going so far, I guess it's just been like those little moments we talked about where you have the really good interactions with the clients. And a lot of them, very lucky to have a supportive family to kind of help me through it. And relying on advice from a lot of people. It's kind of a sink, as it's kind of a sink or swim thing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's like one of the things I found about criminal defense that's both, I guess, a good and a bad thing, which is that, if you hit a lull, if you work hard, that you'll start to see some results, as far as your income and things like that go. At the same time, I think I hit 2 really big cases my first like 3 or 4 months, and I was like, well, this is easy, why doesn't everyone do this? So I kind of took a step back, and then I felt it, it. At the same time, even though you can usually yield some results, the harder you work, you kind of keep your foot on the gas, and I guess the analogy I've heard used is like trying to walk up a down escalator. Either you're going up or you're going down. There's really not a whole lot of stagnation. You're either going to slip backwards or move forward. So, yeah, those have been things that keep me going. I don't know how you handle, I'm sure you've had your ups and downs, how you're able to kind of push through those downs and get through it.
Yeah, I think, one thing that you said that I've definitely heard a lot of people that have made that, kind of prosecution to criminal defense switch is I kind of wanted a new challenge. I had kind of like, done everything that I thought I was going to be able to do within the courtroom setting, side of being a prosecutor. And, obviously there's like caseload management, pressures in terms of being a prosecutor, depending on the county and docket load. There is, kind of, highest level felony. Maybe you've done like 2 or 3 murder trials and you're like, okay, I've kind of experienced that thing, or different evidentiary type of situations that you're like, okay, I've gotten to experience all of these different things within the courtroom. And I think that the challenge on the defense end of things is less kind of workload and product uh, oriented, kind of outcome again oriented, and more people focused, which is its own kind of problem. Like, I mean, it's
Mhm.
very, managing kind of all of these different, um, you know, cases really comes down to, I do think that there's a certain level of, not separating the case from the client. And so it's kind of like, you can, on the criminal defense end of things, you can have a bunch of files, you can have a bunch of cases, and if that's what you have, then you're probably going to burn out, because I think that that just doesn't work well on the defense side of things. Or you can have a bunch of people that are complicated and fascinating and challenging, and that's, I think, where like there is a, again, there's all kinds of like actual charge, maybe I have a real respect as a criminal defense lawyer for anybody that's doing like high level felony stuff, because I've never done that. Trafficking cases and rape, murder is just like, that's just a total black box to me. And so anybody that's kind of involved in that, it's like, you're doing some real criminal defense work. But I think that there is this like challenge, for, regardless of what type of case you're handling, of dealing with, again, client expectations. If you have other people in the office that are working with you, kind of all of these, interpersonal communication, challenges. And so I think that there is just a lot of value in that, and there is a lot of challenge in it. But I think that goal to want to continue to be challenged and see, can I succeed under these new set of circumstances, is a very like shared thing with a lot of people that I've talked to that have made that shift. And I think that's a good driver in terms of like kind of wanting to accept this like new challenge. And so I think, again, avoiding the burnout factor, being able to find those new challenges like at each stage of like firm development, is really important. Because I think once we stop the, kind of the cliche thing is like, if you're not growing, you're dying. Like, I
Yeah.
think, if you don't have that mindset of like, I've got to be doing something that is pushing the envelope a little bit, like, then the passion's going to quickly dry up.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's like when you're got your government job, which I loved, but you could just, you do a heavy trial, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna kind of not work too hard for the next
Yeah,
couple
yeah, yeah,
weeks or whatever,
yeah.
no one's gonna give me any trouble, whatever. That was one of the nice things about it. But at the same time, it doesn't translate well to the business world because, or to owning your own firm, because like you talked about, you kind of get keep pushing and
You have a long trial on the defense side of things, and you come back to a lot of fires.
that's exactly
There's nobody
right.
excited for you. Everybody's like, "Why haven't you been calling me back? Where
Yeah,
have you been?"
it's one thing too. Obviously on the government side, I got to do a lot of trials, and if you lost a big trial, everyone know about it, but everyone would be very encouraging. They'd say, "Hey, like people came watch your closing argument. Hey, you did a great job. It was a tough case." Or, "Hey, the judge told me you did a great job," or "the court reporter told me you did a great job." If you lose a case on the defense end, your client's not like, "Hey, great job." It's very kind of result oriented,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
something that's a little difficult, was also a little difficult for me to get used to, which is, they're paying you money and it's them
yes,
on the line, and just kind of putting in like, obviously for your own sake, putting in a good effort is all you can do. But that's not going to guarantee a hug from the client at the end of
Right.
it. You
Yeah,
know, it's
100%.
at the same time, you have your cases where you barely do anything and you get a great result, and that's fine too. But it's a bit of a struggle because I'm sure you felt like that at least for some time in your career, which is you become invested in the people and
Yes.
just and you're just not able to get the result that you want, and you feel like you let them down, but you kind of have to, it's like a spiritual exercise, I guess, which is just kind of letting go and just saying, I did the best that I could, and here's where we are, and that's that, but that's definitely kind of a big adjustment from the other end. There's not a whole lot of, well, you did a great job anyway. It's like
Yes.
you got it done or you didn't,
Yeah, and I think that that's one reason why, part of our practice has been like focusing on, you know, we're very much like DWI focused. Again, we do other traffic charges and criminal defense work, but like DWI is kind of the bread and butter of the law firm. And so it's one of those things where when somebody calls you after getting a DWI, they're in a place a lot of times where there is a opportunity for real life change to occur. And I think if you get too focused on what happens in the courtroom and like what's the result going to be, and I totally agree that like all of the eliminating anxiety about what the outcome is, good or bad, knowing what the outcome is
Yeah.
better than the unknown. So like, if you can give that clarity, that's really helpful. But I think for us, just even focusing on, how can you uh, kind of use this as a learning opportunity? What was at the heart of some of these decisions? And that doesn't happen in every single
Right.
call, but where there's like an openness to receive some help, or, hey, like I'd really like to get some information about this inpatient treatment, or even encouraging that when there's like a sense that somebody's open to this. I think kind of that focus on how can I help this client really use this as like a catalyst for change is also very engaging, because again, in the courtroom to some extent there's predictability, but sometimes it's like I can predict that you're about to get convicted of this charge. here's, here's what's going to happen. So it doesn't feel like there's a ton of value other than, again, huge value of eliminating the anxiety, but it's like, how can we kind of help, get the client back on track? And I think that there's a lot of, again, just that emotional value that comes out of that for both the client and for us on the criminal defense end of things.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I love. I joke oftentimes about, and I'm sure you would agree, criminal law is much more like Night Court than Law and Order in terms of it's more comedy than drama. And it's not to say it's like funny, but it's more kind of dynamic and fast paced, and there's characters and things like that, kind of like that, as opposed to like, Law and Order. But I mean, one of the cool things about this line of work is that you see very difficult situations, and you see it in your practice, I'm sure, where people are very concerned and very scared about what's going to happen. But despite going through a very bad situation, they can actually come out on the other end better off, and that's one of the things I'm sure you enjoy, and one of the things I enjoy, which is helping people through a difficult situation,
Yes.
no matter what the charge is or what they're going through, and helping them come out on the other end. I remember I had the conversation with the guy on the child abuse case. I was like, I think one day, you're going to look back on this case, and rather than being a source of constant anxiety and worry, you're kind of just going to shake your head at the whole situation. And then I had a conversation with him recently. He's like, yeah, I remember what you said. He's like, it took some time, but we got through it. And now I just kind of shake my head at it. So it's nice to be able to have this particular, every area of law, I'm sure, has its up and downs, but seeing people at their moments where they're in acute distress and working them through the process and getting them to the end where, maybe they're not necessarily, I say, better off, but they made it through, a situation that was
Yes.
very overwhelming and difficult for them is something that's really rewarding.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is, again, if you can find a way to recognize that, and I don't mean you specifically, I think that like to the audience, like if you can find a way to kind of capture that in a bottle, like just be aware of like the impact that you can have on people's lives. I mean, it really is I think that's where it can go from like just burnout to
Yeah.
passion. I mean, that's huge. I love that that's been like the focus of the conversation has kind of been around that, because I think it's so important for us as criminal defense lawyers to regularly reflect on why we're doing this line of work. Um, as we're kind of coming to a close, from either like experience as a prosecutor or now kind of like stepping into criminal defense, for younger lawyers that are looking to kind of improve their game in the courtroom, what would be kind of like you know, one thing or a couple of things that you would kind of, you know, advise, like, hey, this should be like a central point of focus?
I would say that the thing I've learned in terms of being persuasive that I found to be the most helpful is that in order to be believable, you have to be authentic. And in order to be authentic, you have to be comfortable with who you are. I tried many times early in my career as a prosecutor to script my closing arguments word for word, to script my cross-examination and direct examination and opening statement word for word, because I wanted to curate what I thought would be the image I wanted to put forward, the facts that I wanted to put forward, and the persuasive arguments that I wanted to make sure were said in the exact certain way, like it was a movie or TV show. For me, what I have found, and I had a good friend of mine, Craig Rouvier, who's practices out in Tennessee now. He would just we worked together all the time. He would just kind of go up there. He had an idea of what he was going to say, but he's very kind of winging it. But when he was kind of winging it, his personality would come out.
Yeah.
And when his personality would come out, people would realize that he's not saying stuff to look good. Like this is coming from his heart. And so if you can let go of trying to, you don't have an outline, don't get me wrong. At least is my experience. Letting go of the outline, or I shouldn't say letting go of wanting to say word for word what exactly it is that you want to get across, and trying to speak a little bit more from, from winging it or from your heart. Even if you stumble over your words or you sweat or you're anxious, the jury's going to appreciate that you're trying to communicate with them in a way that's authentic, as opposed to the way politicians talk, the American people, blah, 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 blah. But getting up there and trying to talk to them and letting go of the script, even if it means, missing an argument or missing a fact. If you're engaged with them, they will listen to you. And I think that's what I've learned. I think that's the most important thing I've learned in the past 16 or 17 years.
That's interesting. That is a unique answer. I've asked that question to a lot of guests on the podcast, and that's definitely kind of a unique answer. And I totally love it, because I feel like same thing early on. You know, it was just like I just didn't want to look stupid. I didn't even really have like a specific way I wanted the evidence to come out. I just didn't want to look dumb, especially in front of the jury. And so,
Yeah.
you know, it was all very scripted. And then, you know, I'm not a like in your face like throwing stuff on the ground kind of person. I'm very much like, hey, tell me how this happened. You know, let's walk through this together. Let's look at the evidence together. That's my real personality. So when I would get aggressive in the courtroom, it just felt
Yeah.
gross. Like it felt totally, you know, like this person has no, like this is just a bad bully. Like they're not even good at it. Like this, not
Yeah.
even. And I think that, as you know, I know this is true of judges just because they're seeing it all the time, but I felt it more with juries. It's like I have lost their trust. Like that, you know, I'm not saying anything that's untrue, but they are putting very little weight in the way that I'm like presenting this, because of the fact that they're not bought into the feeling. And so, you know, there's times I think one of the privileges that I have of like going into a case that I've had for trial is I always feel like I should win. Even when like
When you're in it. Yeah.
I'll talk to my wife about a case and she's like, that dude is getting convicted. Like there is no chance the jury returns a verdict of not guilty. But like I have this ability to like go in and believe it. So that's I think a good thing because of that like believability factor. But the personality side of it is really important too, because even if you believe in it, if you're presenting it in a way that doesn't feel right, that BS gets sniffed out real quick.
Yeah, I loved your point about trying to be too. I'm a similar personality type, I've been told, and I know I'm more understated, kind of matter of fact. And I've tried a few times to be the TV lawyer with the TV objections. And even as it's coming out, I'm like, this just does not feel right. And you can tell, if you're a perceptive person, you can feel when the jury is not with you, and you can
Yeah.
feel when you're losing them. And I think, I tend to talk a little bit faster. I tend to move a little bit more quickly. I'm just a little more kind of that type of person, and realizing that's the kind of person that I am, and just going from there has
Yes.
been astronaut has really been much more effective than trying to be someone else in order to thinking that that's the kind of person I need to be in order to win the case. So I
Yes.
love your point. I think that's great too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, love that. Well, yeah, very much appreciate RJ you coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom with the audience. Yeah, really looking forward to some future conversations around the business of criminal defense, and definitely best of success in the practice.
And thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll do this again in the future.
Absolutely.